Welcome to the Norbertine Center for Spirituality. I know as usual, we can't gather here at the Abbey because of COVID-19, but we are continuing to bring you the best programming we can via our computers and our tablets and everything else that we can do. So my name is Tony Pickler, the director here at the Norbertine Center for Spirituality. And we're just so pleased that you'll be watching this tape. I do have to apologize. Our live version of this program had some technical difficulties and we just couldn't seem to get over them. And so we are putting this on tape, and hopefully you can find great meaning in the information that you receive tonight. So tonight's program is going to be twofold. Kind of a two-part program here. And the first part will be a presentation on how do we deal with our grief during this time of COVID-19 when we've lost loved ones. And Jenny Bakeman is on hand here to lead us through that. The second part of the program is going to be a short prayer service led by our hospitality coordinator here at the center, Paula Reeder. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you are like me. You have lost a loved one, or you're in the process of losing a loved one. I personally know that I've lost two former colleagues over these last 2 months, and in both cases was unable to celebrate their life like we normally would, with a visitation, a funeral, a celebration of life or something. And so we're awaiting that possibility down the line, but that's what this program is all about. How do we grieve during this very, very unusual time of a pandemic? And so I want to introduce to you Jenny Bakeman. I have known Jenny when she was Jenny Cunard over at St. Norbert College as an undergraduate student at the college. She was a member of the college parish following graduation as an alum. And then she got married to Brian Bakeman, and they now have two wonderful children who are getting very old, 14 and 11, and just phenomenal kids and parented by phenomenal people. And so Jenny Bakeman is over at Unity Hospice as a grief counselor. And so we are going to turn this over to her and just gather what you can tonight as you deal with your own grief. So Jenny, take it away.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. I have to say that as I spent some time with this morning, I was really wrestling how to start our time together tonight. It didn't seem right to jump just right into this presentation. It seems to me that it's important to honor and name what's in front of us. When Tony and Ann reached out to talk about this presentation and even think about what this might mean, we were at that time in the heat of COVID-19 and gosh, the implications of the virus and on all of our lives. And today we are mourning the murder of George Floyd, and just acknowledging so much injustice and racism. So I think it's important to name things. And so we name these things that our community is bringing today. And so, and I also want to say with that, oftentimes people, when there's so much going on, people will minimize what their own experience. And so when we lead grief groups, people will say things like, well, I shouldn't be this sad, or I don't really have a right to be feeling like I'm having such a difficult time because of what? And then they fill in the blank. Because I got to say goodbye, because my loved one had all of these years, because we have so many years of memories. And so tonight or today, whenever you are watching this, I just invite you to peel back some of those layers. This time may bring up things for you, and so I also invite you to care gently for yourself. And so that might mean you need to pause this or reach out. So in her book, Brene Brown's book, Braving the Wilderness, Brene shared the idea of writing permission slips. And so when I think of permission slips, I think of those frantic mornings when kids actually went to school and we're like right out the door and your kid remembers, oh, I've had this permission slip in my backpack for 2 weeks, but the field trip is today. And if you don't sign it right now, I can't go on the field trip. So that's not the kind of permission slip I'm talking about tonight. What I'm referencing is a grown-up version of a permission slip. And so as we start our time together today, I invite you to give yourself permission, and invite you to think about, what do I need to give myself permission to let go of, to be present to this time? What can you give yourself permission to think about, or to feel, or to experience, so that you can be here with us? So let's enter this time with some intention. The intention to learn a bit maybe about your grief, to learn a bit perhaps about others' grief, people that you care about, and as Tony shared at the end, to take some time to honor a loved one, honor your loved one. So as Tony shared at the beginning, I work with Unity Hospice, and so as a nonprofit hospice, we provide hospice, palliative, and grief support in 13 counties throughout northeastern Wisconsin, and our grief support is open to all who have experienced a death. Our department really envisions a community where no one needs to grieve alone, and so that is my hope, my intention, that this is a time for you to know that you are not alone. So we're going to try to do the share screen, which worked before. So let's see. Okay. All right. It's good. Can you guys all see it? Okay, excellent. Okay, so the title of this presentation is Losing a Loved One During COVID-19, How Do We Grieve? And I would expand this to losing a loved one prior to COVID-19 and grieving during this time. And so we're going to talk a bit about what that, how to perhaps do that, and how do we give ourselves permission to grieve. So during this time, we're going to be focusing on the Mourner's Bill of Rights. And these were written by Dr. Alan Wolfelt. And so I think it's important that we talk about, the words we use are very important. So it's important for us to maybe talk about some words that we might be using tonight. So I want to start with the distinction between grief and mourning. So I'll just use actually Dr. Wolfelt's words. He says that we as humans move toward integrating loss into our lives, not just by grief, but by mourning. You will move towards reconciliation, not just by grieving, but through active and intentional mourning. So what's the distinction? Grief is all of the internal thoughts and the feelings we have when someone dies. So you can think about grief as the container. It holds your thoughts, feelings, and images of all your experiences when someone dies. And mourning is when you take that grief that you have on the inside and you express it on the outside. So another way of defining mourning is grief gone public, or the outward expression of grief. So the mourning piece is very important so that you have a place to go with what's on the inside. So let's take a little bit of time to talk about what are some rights that you have as you are grieving. And when I talk about rights, it's what do you give yourself permission? What can you, maybe using the words that we started with, how can you write yourself a permission slip to experience these things? So the first one, you have the right to experience your own unique grief. So no one will grieve the exact same way that you do. If there's a loss within a family, you have all had a different relationship with that person. You all have different, maybe other experiences. You all have different support systems, different ways of coping. And so your experience, it may have been the same person, but your experience will be unique to you. There's so many factors that go into that. So an important piece of that is to try not to compare yourself to other people. So to judge how you are doing in comparison to how others are doing. Also important, because everyone is experiencing it their own way, that you also get to handle what you're experiencing in your own unique way. That you have a right to talk about your grief. And that's a little bit about that piece about the grief, your experience going outward. Talking can be helpful. It can be helpful to retell the story. I sometimes think about it in terms of sometimes to go forward, you have to go backwards and make sense of some of the things that you've experienced. So like Tony said, you know, experiencing the death of someone that you love during this time, it's a lot of pieces to put together of what has happened and make sense of that. So sometimes to make sense of it, you have to like work through that. And that might mean telling the story over and over. So it's important to find someone who is willing to listen to that story. People that will listen without that judgment piece and without telling you what needs to happen. And I think it's okay to think about what are other ways to talk about your grief. So sometimes talking, I think, can be in the form of words. Sometimes it can be in the form of action. Sometimes it can be with people who are supportive of you, and perhaps it might also mean talking to the person who died. Just because the relationship has changed, it hasn't ended. So many people that we work with find a lot of comfort in continuing to talk with the person who died. Sometimes they think that that might be a little weird or that there's something wrong with them. But that's actually really common and really normal and really healthy to establish a new type of relationship with the person who died. So you have the right to feel a multitude of emotions. And gosh, aren't we all living in that kind of world right now? You'll often hear that there's no right or wrong emotion, or there's no right or wrong way to feel. I would say that there are probably some more things that are comfortable to feel than other things. So oftentimes people will say that they feel like they're all over the place, that they might be okay one minute and then gosh, the next minute they are just not okay. Sometimes they know maybe what triggered that. It can be as simple as looking at the box of cereal that reminds them of, you know, the years of having breakfast at the table together. Sometimes it's not as easy to understand, why am I feeling so sad today? Or why am I okay? Why was I okay yesterday? And sometimes there's many different emotions at the same time. You know, you might be relieved at the same time that you feel just like this incredible longing. There might be this peace and this incredible sadness. Perhaps there's guilt, perhaps there are regrets, perhaps anger, and maybe being confused. And then perhaps the thing that maybe confuses us most is that when we just don't feel anything, kind of numb to it all. The question of how are you doing today can seem like the worst possible question that someone could ask, because you really have no idea how you're feeling on that day or that moment, because there's so many different things, so many new experiences. So you have the right to be tolerant of your physical and emotional limits. So the experience of someone dying, going through the dying process of someone, can be incredibly exhausted and have effect after someone dies. So oftentimes we hear people talk about, I'm just so tired. I can't remember anything. I can't concentrate on anything. Like when I read something, I read the words, but nothing really goes in. They will say that perhaps I have like a tight chest, like it's hard to breathe, or their stomach is upset. Oftentimes people will say I have a difficult time with my sleep. So it's either hard to stay asleep, hard to fall asleep, or maybe I just don't want to stop sleeping. It can feel like a lot of hard work, like the simplest things. What you used to be able to do is very different than what you're able to do at this time. So it's really important with this one is to know that this doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you, that you have these pieces or these limits at this time. This is just where you are at this time. doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just is. It just is. And so, like I said, the caregiving can sometimes catch up and impact people for months along the way. You know, when perhaps you're doing the caregiving or someone is dying and then not able to be there, you kind of are going through all of those motions of what you need to do to keep going. And then the busyness subsides, right? And so you're left with where you are at. So just being aware that those limits are kind of can be expected at this time. So you have the right to experience grief attacks. You know, sometimes things may trigger your grief. We talked about that a little bit with the cereal box, but sometimes perhaps people will say that they smell something or they see something, or a memory will just kind of pop out of nowhere and wash over you. And it's almost like people will say, well, I didn't really have any control. And that can be a really difficult thing when people are perhaps trying to be at a meeting or trying to take care of their kids, and it washes over. And so in those kind of times, it can be helpful, and it sounds so easy, but taking a deep breath, maybe removing yourself if you can from that and asking for a minute. Sometimes we talk about it to put a bookmark in that. So not to mean that you forget about, you don't ever deal with it, but that you put a bookmark in it and come back to it, and to set an intentional time for you to let yourself kind of mourn and let yourself feel what is there and what needs to come out. People find if they are able to give themselves the opportunity to express their experience, that those kind of like grief attacks don't happen as often. So allowing yourself, just again, it's the theme of just going gently. So you have the right to make use of rituals. And Tony, what you shared at the beginning, these rituals, this time has looked so different. When we talk about rituals, when it comes to someone dying, those rituals, they give you something to do with your grief. It gives you an opportunity to be also surrounded with people who you're also experiencing this with. And so rituals have had to look very different right now. And often people that we're talking to are hopeful that there will be a time in the future, but with obviously no time or date, but that they will have the opportunity to do a funeral, a memorial, so that people can come together and share their stories, because it's so important. But I would say don't minimize the rituals that you can still do now. They can be simple things, lighting a candle, perhaps sharing memories. Technology has its benefits, it also has its limits, but it is a way to connect with other people, to share some of those memories. If you're able to, sometimes people find it helpful to go to the cemetery. The things that may bring you meaning may be unique to the relationship that you had with that person. And so my grandmother died before, just right before actually all of the COVID happened at the end of February. And so today what that looks like for me is wearing earrings that were special to my grandma. And so it's a different kind of ritual, but it's a way of connecting with the person who died. So maybe there are some objects that maybe hold meaning. People will talk about, sometimes I will smell their clothing or hug, like a shirt, put it on a pillow to sleep with, put a pillow right behind so that it feels like there's someone right there. Perhaps those are things that may sound weird or not quite right. Those are the important things, the things that that give you comfort. Oftentimes people will tell us that they have a picture of their loved one, perhaps on the dinner table or next to their bed, and they will say good morning, or they'll say good night, they'll kiss the picture. Those are the kind of rituals that you're including that person in your day in a different way, but they're still a part of it. It's important. So during this time, you have the right to embrace your spirituality and whatever that means for you. Sometimes people find that their spirituality, their faith connection becomes stronger during this time. It gives them a lot of comfort, and it gives them a foundation. Other people find that maybe their faith or their spirituality was really important to them, and at this time it's not providing the comfort that they had thought it would or would have imagined it would. Perhaps they're questioning things. It's one thing to believe things, and then another thing to believe them when they really matter. And so things like what happens to the person after they die, the thought about heaven and the belief about heaven means something totally different when there's someone that you love that's died and you wonder, where are they? Like, how does that actually work, and what do I actually believe? So sometimes when there are questions like that, people will kind of have some guilt about that. And this is a time where it's a really common experience to ask some bigger meaning-making kind of questions, and important to find those people that allow you to have those kind of questions and support you as you make sense of all of these different pieces. So that goes right along to this, that you have a right to search for meaning. So often people will give cliches, and you don't have to accept them. Such as everything happens for a reason, or God won't give you more than you can handle, or anything that really starts with at least, is not all that helpful. And it also doesn't acknowledge what this is for you. And it's one thing if you say that, and it's another thing if people put that on you. You don't have to take anything that people put on you. The questions of why and how are asked, and you have a right to ask those questions. So much has changed at this time. Things that maybe meant so much to you at one time perhaps don't mean the same things anymore. Perhaps there's not the passion for things that you used to enjoy like there used to be. That will come, and it's okay to let that be how it is, to name that. The reality is that normal isn't normal anymore. Things have changed, and sometimes people say, well, there will become a new normal. And we think about that in terms of right now, that there will be a new normal. And I'm not even sure that even makes total sense. I wonder what normal even means. The reality is probably that you will find your way through this in ways that will make sense. And as you work to kind of build and kind of like reconstruct what your life will be. And that's kind of where it comes to meaning, is that this can be an opportunity that you never would have chosen. And yet it is an opportunity to continue to choose life. And sometimes choosing life means asking some of those really hard questions and finding for you, how do you make meaning in all of this? Meaning doesn't need to be that you accept this. I'm not sure how we can accept any of the things that are happening right now, or accept the things that have happened. But perhaps there are ways for you to make peace or to find your way through it. And that doesn't mean that there's a solid answer for how to go about that. Gosh, you have a right to treasure your memories. Sometimes people will, when people are grieving, they'll find that people around them won't say their loved one's name, or they won't talk about them. It's kind of like the elephant in the room. everyone knows that it's here, but nobody wants to talk about it because maybe nobody wants to make you cry. No one wants to make you feel sad or alone. The reality is that that is your experience. And so treasuring those memories might mean sharing that. Those memories are your connection, your lasting connection to that person. And with that, sometimes memories are bittersweet. Sometimes memories are, I would say, just for some people, they're too hot to touch. Even the good ones can feel like it's too painful. Perhaps memories might be a reminder that there won't be any more, or of what was, and that big hole that is now there. So there may be a time that memories aren't all that comforting, and there may be a time where it's actually difficult to remember anything beyond what happened at the end. And that may be, for some people, what they're finding right now, because there's just this piece of, like, it's hanging out there. They didn't have that opportunity for some of those rituals. And so that the end is kind of what's freshest. And the reality is that the end of their life, the end of the person's life was a part of their life, but not the whole of their life. And so people encourage you, if memories are a difficult thing for you, that to continue to go there with the pictures or with the items. And if it's too hard to touch, just respect your own limits. Sometimes people find that they need to put away the pictures, or they need to put the picture down. And sometimes people will say, I need the pictures. I actually need to put up more pictures and have more of those things. It's unique to you. Again, the important piece is that that relationship hasn't ended. Memories are a way for you to keep that person alive, and sharing those stories and what you learned are a way that that person continues to stay alive and to stay with us. I was just talking last night that, so much of who we are is because of the people that have loved us and the ways in which we have loved others. And so that's a piece of those memories. It's almost like by remembering the people that you love that have died, you're almost remembering parts of who you are, like at your core. And so the memories are important, and also respect the fact that sometimes memories can be just too painful. And so you have a right to move toward your grief, which maybe sounds like a little bit odd, that to move towards it and to heal. So that really, this is at your pace. You get to do this at your pace. So things like going through your loved one's things, there isn't a timeline of that. Some people do it right away. Some people wait a year. It's kind of, and there isn't a way to really know that, other than people seem to tell me that they know when it's time and when they're ready to do it. Some people choose to have people help them do those things, and some want to do that on their own. It's one of those things that perhaps it's like dosing yourself into it, that perhaps you try, and if it's just, again, too hot to touch, you give yourself the space to back away. I'm like, okay, today's not the day. Or maybe it's a drawer that you do today, maybe a half a drawer, and then it becomes too much. But really, that you get to do. I worked with a man years ago that he had all of his wife's things, and every time I talked to him, he didn't know what he was going to do, and nothing felt right. It didn't bother him that the clothes were in the closet. Sometimes it does bother people that the clothes are in the closet. So, they might choose to put them in a box if they're not ready, and then maybe donate them, because that could be comforting, knowing that they're going to continue to, be used by other people. Some people put them in a box until they're ready, but this man, he didn't. He found that he just wasn't time, and he didn't really know. And after a year, I think it was after a year, I talked with him, and he was really excited. And I asked him why he was so excited. And he said, I finally figured it out. I figured out what I wanted to do with her clothes. And he had quilts made out of his wife's clothing. And he gave he had a bunch of kids, and he gave those quilts to all of his kids and then his grandkids. And it was a really beautiful thing because he did it at his pace. When we started working together shortly after his wife died, he didn't, if I would have suggested that, or if he would have, we might have even talked about it, but it didn't sit right with him at that time. And so he trusted that, I guess he trusted himself, which is a really important piece in all of this. To trust yourself that you have within you what it is to move towards that pain and to heal. Sometimes it can feel like if I let myself feel this, if I let myself cry, I'll never stop. If I let myself feel it, I won't be able to keep going. And it seems to me that when you don't allow that space to feel that, it tends to pop up in all of the other places. It tends to pop up in being irritable, perhaps with others, not being able to sleep, perhaps some of those grief kind of outbursts, physical kinds of things. So it's important to move towards that, and it's also okay to give yourself breaks. Sometimes the most interesting thing for people is that they'll find that they actually have a day where they feel happy, and they had maybe like a stretch of time where they didn't think about their loved one, or didn't think about their pain, didn't think about what happened during that time. And then it washes over them like this incredible amount of guilt. Like, how could I go that time and not think about her? How could I actually feel happy after losing this person who was so special to me? And so that guilt kind of washes over. Like, it's almost like if we're so attached to our pain, that if we stay attached to that pain, we're somehow attached to the person. It sounds pretty trite. My guess is that the person who died would probably want you to have that moment of peace. And what I know about grief, and what people have told me about grief, is that it comes in waves. And so if you're able to have a time where that wave washes out for a bit, maybe just that's a moment, that's a gift. And maybe allow yourself to take that gift, knowing that most likely that sadness or that pain will kind of wash back in. But this moment of peace and this break perhaps will help you manage through the next one. Grief, so many people use different analogies to talk about grief. Grief is a roller coaster. Like I said, grief is like waves coming in and out. I heard a man in one group, he talked about how shortly after his wife died, grief was like this, he was like in this box, and there was it was like a ball that just kept hitting, going all over the place. Like, it just kept knocking all over the place. And then it kind of changed and it became bigger. And so he didn't feel it as much, but it got heavier. Like, it just got bigger and more encompassing. And then perhaps the ball kind of just didn't move as much, but it would still sometimes just ding in places that he wasn't quite expecting. Sometimes people talk about it like it's a ball of yarn. Like, you just pull one thing and it comes, like it all just seems like it's unraveled. The 5 stages, people often say, well, these 5 stages, and the reality is that life and grief are not so clean and not so orderly. The goal of this is not to get over. That people will sometimes say, well, are you over it yet? Not sure that ever fits for people. We don't get over people. We don't get over people that we love. We find our way through, and we find, the hope is that we find life. Find life, in a life that incorporates all that we learned and all the ways that our loved one loved us and all the ways that we loved them. and we continue to live. And so that would be the goal. The reality is that the only way through this is through it. And so, sometimes it is pretty uncomfortable, and it's pretty inconvenient and pretty burdening, perhaps. But it's this thing that we can try to walk around it, but the reality is that it's still there. And so, the only way through it is really through it. And so you have a right to move towards the things that bring you healing. And these are just some really general kinds of things, but how do you care for yourself while you're grieving? And my goodness, that looks different during this time, doesn't it? So often we think about the ways to care for ourselves is to be with other people. And so how do you do that when we're at home? And now as we are trying to re-enter into life and into day-to-day interactions with people and what feels safe there, there's different things to be thinking about at this time. So people will say that, well, it'll get better in time. I think what we found when we hear people talk about that, yes, time can heal, but really time can heal if you use the time. So with that, it's not just a given that, well, I'll feel better in 6 months. But really, what are you doing to care for yourself during those 6 months? So it's important to take that time and make that space for your healing, to be realistic with what you can expect from yourself. And that's a big one. So often we talk about how people put judgments on us, like tell us what they think that we should do to take care of ourselves, or how we should think, or how we should feel. But it seems to me that oftentimes we're pretty hard on ourselves. We expect things from ourselves that we wouldn't expect from someone else that we cared for. Sometimes when I'm working with someone, I will ask, if you were talking with your friend, and if your friend was telling you all of the things that you just told me, all of the love that you had for this person, what you had to walk through with them at the end, what would you tell them? And typically there's a little bit of a softening, and they will look and they will maybe say, well, I would tell them that it's okay. It's okay that you feel that of course that you would feel that way. Whereas before they were saying, why do I feel like this? I shouldn't feel like this. I should be stronger. I should be doing more. But when they talk to themselves like they would a friend, there's a lot more, there's more gentleness. And that perhaps is the truth, because we wouldn't lie to a friend, right? We would be really gentle with a friend. So I would encourage you that if that may be a way to maybe shift some of your thinking, or perhaps that heaviness that you are putting maybe even unknowingly on yourself, like to take a breath and ask that question, what would I tell a friend who is experiencing this right now? And sometimes that can help just kind of shift things a little bit, to bring some gentleness into what this is. Expect the ups and downs. So along with that, people will sometimes say, well, what's wrong with me that I have just really up and down days? What people often tell us that in the beginning, shortly after the death, that they find that they have just really no maybe good moments. And then time and care, they find perhaps that they can say that they have a good hour, a good couple hours strung together. Maybe they could say I had a good day. Maybe they could say like I had a good week. And I put good in quotes because maybe good is what we think about as comfortable. But then they find maybe that there's a patch where there's some down, some sad, or they're feeling anger or regret, or just kind of down, and they wonder like, what's wrong with me? It's important to know that that's a part of this process. It's a part of what you can expect in this grief journey. Those ups and downs don't mean that you're doing anything wrong. You're not doing anything wrong if there's a good day and a bad day, or a day where you feel like a little bit lighter, or a day where you experience maybe some joy, and then a patch where you feel like you're drowning and you can't get anything done and it all feels so heavy. That's a part of the journey. And it's important to take some breaks as you're able to. And as I shared before, like even have some fun. And that does look different for every person. It's kind of like, well, what would that mean for you? For me, that would mean like an ice cream, that would mean an ice cream cone, or it might mean a walk. For some people, it means going on a drive, and some people, it may be going on a walk or watching a funny show. That can be really comforting to people, listening to music, things that give you a little bit of life. Take a little bit of break from yourself, from what you're feeling. And allowing yourself to experience that, because you're for sure experiencing the other side of it. So allowing yourself to experience this other piece of it. And so there's different ways to cope with grief. And we think about grief in terms of it affects all these different parts of us, right? So it affects our body. And so different ways that people find helpful can be all of the things here. So exercise. So that can mean different things for different people, right? For some people, it's a stretch to like walk to your mailbox to get the mail. And so honoring what that is for you, a massage, as that is able to happen, just that physical touch, right? And keeping up with your doctor appointments, keeping up with letting your doctor know what you're experiencing during this. Focusing on your breathing. And again, it seems like such a small piece, and yet a minute of slowing down your breathing and being mindful with that can really change that. There are a lot of really great guides to that, like even just on YouTube, that can guide you through breathing in and breathing out. Eating well. These are things that are kind of like easier said than done. They seem like simple things, and they are. The simple things doesn't mean that it's easy to do. Giving yourself credit for doing the simple things. Sleep, that is another really important piece. And so that might be a piece to be in touch with your doctor about. Grief can affect your mind, as we talked about. It can be difficult to remember. It can be difficult to focus. And so reading may be a comfort. It can be kind of like a relief, but it can also be something that maybe right away just doesn't work for you. So if it doesn't work today, maybe give it a try in a week or in 2 weeks. That's kind of what we find too, is things that provide some kind of comfort that changes over time. So that's definitely a part of it. Sometimes learning about grief can be really helpful. So learning about grief, perhaps by meeting with someone to talk about what can I expect. Right now, it might mean doing some reading online, listening to other people talk about their experience. What I find about learning about grief and maybe hearing about that other people's experience, sometimes it can be helpful to see your experience in words. So I might be going through this, but I don't know how to put words to it. And so reading someone else's or hearing podcasts, there's a lot of great podcasts. Learning a bit about grief can be helpful to maybe help you put words to your own experience. We also, like I shared before, we can put a lot of judgment on ourselves. And so if we know that this is a part of it, that can be helpful. Expressing yourself. So sometimes people do that through journaling. Sometimes people do that through art. Journaling can take a lot of different forms. I've had clients that have, they've journaled as like a note, like a journal to their loved one. So perhaps I would journal to my grandmother, or I would journal in the voice of my grandma, like what would my grandmother say to me? Journaling can be what you, like I said, what you would want them to know. It can also be just kind of tracking your experience of what this has been. That can help show how this has changed over time. A lot of times people will say, well, they don't really notice the changes as they go. However, looking back, perhaps you can see some changes. So talking with others, making notes. We kind of joke about it that perhaps sometimes we might make a Post-it note to remind us where we put the other Post-it notes, which have the notes about what we need to do. It can be hard to remember things, and you might feel like you're kind of losing your mind. So the little tricks like this can be really helpful. Maybe even just in general, that could be a good trick, right? So in caring for your spirit, as we talked about, music can be really, and that might mean something like really upbeat music, or music that is calm, peaceful. Perhaps it's music that reminds you of your loved one. Sometimes people will say, well, I just can't cry. Like, I just wish I could get it out. Music can sometimes evoke that in you. So there might be a certain song that, hey, I know if I listen to this, I'm going to cry. And that can be a tool for you, a way to bring out some of that emotion that just needs to come out. Volunteering, and that might look different now, but volunteering, people have found that allows them to connect with others, and there's a sense of being connected to others and feeling like they're of service that can be helpful. Ceremonies and rituals are an important way to connect with our spirit that look perhaps different now. Talking to your loved one. Many times people will say that they find that they are asking for or looking for signs, or have experienced signs from their loved one, and they feel like that's perhaps their loved one saying that they're okay, or that they're with them. Things like cardinals or butterflies or dragonflies or a bud on a tree or a penny. Those are beautiful things, and they're ways that we try to make meaning, and we find connection. Prayer, meditation, taking the time to just to process this can be ways that perhaps that's something that you've relied on in the past, and maybe that's something right now that you may find extra meaningful. There also may be the piece where you are noticing that you're holding on to some regrets, or I wish I would have, if only I could have, and that burden can be quite heavy. And I'm finding that at this time can be a bit heavier. If I would have been able to be there, I would have seen this, and they would have had this opportunity. And so the importance of forgiving ourselves, again, going back to what would they want for you? What would your loved one perhaps say to you? What would they want to gift you at this time? And can you allow yourself to receive pieces of that? And maybe it's receiving pieces of that piece by piece. That is sometimes a way that people also use a journal, to write a letter and ask for that forgiveness. And perhaps that the journal could go the other way too, is that your loved one granting you forgiveness. So those are just a couple of ways to care for yourself while you're grieving. And the reality also is that, I hesitate even to give those things because it makes it sound, well, if you do this and this, then it equals this. We know life doesn't work like that. We wish it did. And I think at no greater time than when we're grieving do we sure wish it did work like that. But we trust the process, and we trust that we are not alone in this. Right now, it can feel like that. And so as you are here and as you're listening to this, please know that you are not alone in any of this. Our Unity's information is here on this website, and so if we can be of support to you, as I shared, we have grief counselors that are here to listen, to care for you, to provide education and support as you make your way through this. We are here, so please feel free to utilize this information, and we are happy to connect and be here for you. So, Tony, I am going to bring the screen back to you.
All right, Jenny, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation on the grief process and how people can go through grief, not get over, like you said, but to go through the grief process. And it's such important information now, excuse me, during this time of the pandemic, but it's just really good information anytime. And so I'm hoping that as people are watching this video tonight, or whenever you're watching this, that you take the information yourselves, but if you know somebody who is grieving the loss of somebody, a friend, a coworker, another family member, that you share it with them and get this in their hands so that they too can have this information from Jenny. It was just such wonderful and important information. So Jenny, thank you so much. We are going to have Jenny back with us next fall. Unity Hospice has done a lot of work in terms of the grief process. And I think it was last fall, Jenny, you might have to correct me on that. Unity Hospice worked with the Karma Group and did a whole listening process on grief and what are the needs for like a grief center, and what are people looking for, what are people needing in terms of the grieving process. And so next fall, we're going to have Jenny back along with Deacon Steve Meyer, who's the Chief Strategy Officer for the Karma Group. And they will be here for a two-part series on what they found, as well as we'll be showing a film on grief. And so that should be really an amazing two-part series. It's in October, so keep your eyes and ears open for the announcement on that offering. We're just putting, Ann Herlash, who's on this call, is putting the final touches on the program guide for summer fall, and that will be one of our premier programs in the fall. So we're really looking forward to that, Jenny. And thanks again for the presentation tonight. Next Thursday, June 11th, 6:30 to 8, if our technology works, and we will keep our fingers crossed and prayers out there that it will, we will have another session on grief, but kind of broaden it out a little bit to all of the ways that we are grieving things these days during the COVID-19 pandemic. Things such as not being able to see the grandchild that you might be able to see more often if we weren't going through this, or not getting the hug from the, the person who's, a close friend of yours, or not being able to just do what you normally would do, like go to a movie, go to a restaurant, go to Target, go to whatever you need to do. So we're gonna broaden that out a little bit in terms of the whole grieving process through this COVID-19 pandemic. And we're going to have Deacon Mike Mervildi, who's a clinical social worker, retired now, in town, here to lead the discussion on that. So next Thursday, June 11th, spread the word and keep your fingers crossed that our technology works. A couple other things I just want to let people know about before we move into our prayer service. And that is that each week we have 3 emails that go out to people, and we are developing tools and meditations and videos and various tools to help you through this time of more social isolation. And so one of the things that we put out on Fridays is a program called Virtually Sunday. It's a scripture program, 3 to 4 minute scripture meditation our reflection for the upcoming Sunday readings. And so you might want to take advantage of that. You can get on our email list by emailing ncs@norbertines.org, and we'll be happy to get you on our mailing list, and you can get really great resources like that. We also have a Spanish resource called El Domingo Virtual, same type of meditation or reflection in Spanish. So if you know some Spanish-speaking friends or coworkers, let them know about that as well. So we are going to turn this over to Paula Reeder, who is our hospitality coordinator, as well as a spiritual director here at the Norbertine Center for Spirituality. She's got a prayer service planned to help honor and celebrate the loved ones that you may have lost over these last 2 to 3 months. And so I'm going to, while Paula's getting ready here, I'm going to share my screen and get ready for her. So, and let's try this, and we will drop this down, and I will get her presentation up, and I've got to move some people over here.
And you know what, Tony,
yes.
if I could just take a moment and just really say, Jenny, thank you so very much for tonight. You know, I have not actually lost somebody right at this moment and during these times, but the things that you said just resonated with me. I have notes. I was taking all these notes, and one of the things that I just really found to be super helpful, I think just universally, is this idea of like bookmarking this moment. You know, whether you could handle the moment right now or not, but just to be able to bookmark that moment was something I found really, really powerful. And one of the other little things too was you mentioned like cliches, like you don't have to accept them. And that I've never heard that before. And I can be really honest, I've never experienced in my adult years the loss of somebody close to me. But what you said was just really, really powerful. And there's so much more I could say on all the notes that I took, but thank you so much. It was just really great to hear and to experience. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was a fantastic program, Jenny. We thank you so much. And we just wish you all the best with you and your family and your sons, and can't wait for you to come back in October. Yeah. And we will hopefully be here at the Norbertine Center for Spirituality at St. Norbert Abbey instead of virtually. So let's keep our fingers crossed and our prayers going for that as well. Yeah, thank you. So we're going to turn this over to Paula and to lead us in a prayer service to remember our loved ones.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Jenny, for sharing your many gifts with us tonight. On behalf of the Norbertine Center for Spirituality and myself, we send our condolences to you and your families as we join together in prayer. God, who gave us birth, you are even more ready to hear than we are to pray. You know our needs before we ask and our ignorance in asking. Show us now your grace, that as we face the mystery of death, we may see the light of eternity. Speak to us once more your joyful message of life and death overcome. Help us to live as those who are prepared to die. And when our days here are ended, enable us to die as those who go forth and live, so that in both living and dying, our life may be in Jesus Christ, our risen Savior.
Peace be with you, everybody. Thanks for being with us tonight. Good night.